So, hi, I'm Astrid. I'm one of the UX principal consultants at Nomensa. And I wanted to talk to you today about existentialism because it's been quite a formative philosophy for me in my life and my work. And I feel like there's a lot that we can learn from it. So I wanted to start by telling you the story of Sisyphus. This is a Greek myth about a man who annoyed the gods and was punished by having to roll a boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down again, and this process went on forever. And Albert Camus, an existentialist thinker and writer, used this story to talk about the absurdity of human life and how we struggle to make meaning of the world around us and the chaos and the contradictions that we face. And I feel like sometimes we face these things at work as well. And I wanted to kind of talk about this as in our talk today, but I just wanted to start by asking if you could put your hands up if you feel like this is a familiar feeling to you in your UX work. Definitely for me. And keep your hands up if you know something about existentialism. Okay, there's a few of you. So for those of you who do know something about existentialism, perhaps you came here today expecting a bit of this. French cafe, cigarettes, philosophical discussion. Well, we're actually going to be talking about this, which is the crazy reality of real UX work and what existential principles can bring to help us become stronger and more resilient UX practitioners. So let's imagine we're starting a new project, new team, new stakeholders, it all kicks off, really exciting. And as you get into it, you start uncovering the reality, which is lots of acronyms and jargon, lots of legacy systems, convoluted processes, unclear briefs, missing information, organizational politics. I mean, I'm sure you can feel what that's like. And often this is all in the context of competing priorities, high pressure environments, organizational change, market volatility, technology, rapidly evolving. So it kind of feels a bit like you're in this crazy computer game, things flying at you, just keeping going. And the challenge is that businesses, the world, and our users are complex, and that complexity is only increasing. And this stat from McKinsey says that 75% of organizations predict that generative AI will lead to significant or disruptive change in their industries in the years ahead. And I think that's just a sample of the disruption that we face. And it's something that we need to develop the skills to cope in this situation. The other thing is that our clients and stakeholders want certainty as well. They're also facing all of this complexity and ambiguity, and they want us to kind of come with the right answers. What is the right way forward? How do we stay competitive? What is the low effort, low budget miracle solution to our problem? And this puts us as UXers under lots of pressure. We're people who are constantly trying to balance the business needs and the user needs in this complex environment, and trying to do the right thing, but also knowing that there aren't any certain answers all the time. And it can feel like a lonely existence. So, these are just some sample stories out there about the kind of stress and burnout that people experience struggling with that uncertainty. And this complexity and uncertainty can give us this really intense feeling of absurdity. This is actually me last week. And it gives us that sense of wanting to laugh and cry at the same time. But it can also sometimes give us a bit of a crisis of confidence where we're second-guessing ourselves. Are these actually the right decisions? It's not always clear. And so we're kind of left with this question: how do I hold this uncertainty whilst also coming across as credible to these clients and stakeholders and coming up with a solution that achieves our aims? And for me, I think there's a strong relationship between philosophy and UX. I think they both require this creative and courageous sides of our brains. And I think that for me, existential principles have really helped me to deal with these complex UX challenges, and that they can help us become stronger and more resilient. So, now we know a bit about the issues that we face. What can we actually learn from existentialism? First, a little bit of background. So, for those of you who haven't come across it, existentialism is a philosophy born in the early 20th century. It is often linked with famous French thinkers, Jean-Paul Sartre, Simone de Beauvoir, but there are plenty of others across the world who have thought about it and written about it. But at its core, existentialism believed that there are no predetermined outcomes, there's no inherent meaning in life, and when we face that reality, it sends us into a bit of crisis. But to be able to cope with that, we can lean into our freedom of choice and take responsibility for those choices. So, how do we practically apply this thinking, you might be thinking? Well, in 2003, James Ogilvy wrote an article about existential strategy, talking about how this emerged to help organizations cope with the difficulties they were facing. So he said, just as existential philosophy emerged in Europe between two world wars when life got weird for individuals and the old verities no longer seemed to hold true, so existential strategy emerged during the final decades of the 20th century as life was getting weird for organizations. And I think that 20 years on, life is still pretty weird. So I think that, as the level of demand increases for us, we can still lean on existential strategy to innovate in the face of uncertainty. And I'm going to share 5 existential truths for UX strategy and some practical ways that we can adopt this. So 1, to be a UXer is to exist in a state of tension and ambiguity. Embrace the ambiguity together. So it's really hard when there aren't any clear answers, and the temptation is to simplify to cope with this. And when our clients feel that and stakeholders feel that tension, they think, there's something missing. If only they had the right answer, all of that ambiguity and unclarity would be resolved. But that kind of anxiety that's felt sometimes gets pushed back onto us as practitioners. And for me, the skill isn't in knowing for certain, but it's about being able to confidently hold that uncertainty, make meaning of it, and to make decisions about the way forward. So I've kind of used this to show that when we do that as a team and in collaboration, we can help take the weight of that responsibility. So one practical thing that we can do to make this happen is to create space for real conversations. So it's really easy to get trapped in the day-to-day and just have those surface level conversations. But if you can lean into really listening and responding authentically, you can start to uncover what the hopes and fears are of the people around you about the project and help you to create the foundation for more productive collaboration. In a project, you might use more formal things like stakeholder interviews to start to pull that out. But ultimately, what we want to do is to normalize the fact that there is uncertainty, that's a normal experience, and that we can kind of confidently hold that as UXers. So, truth number 2, facing up to hard truths is part of our job. Lean into authenticity to design meaningful, inclusive experiences. So all of that complexity and uncertainty can make us shy away from asking difficult questions. But that also means that there are often lots of assumptions that we make about the businesses that we work in, the teams that we work with, and the users that we serve. And I think that being kind of authentic means being brave, facing up to those hard truths, and asking the difficult questions. So, as UX strategists, one thing that we can do to make this happen is to lean into uncovering the complexity. So rather than shying away from it, it's really starting to uncover as much as you can. One way of starting to do that is horizon scanning. So really kind of bringing together a diverse team and looking at what the problems and challenges and opportunities that there are that are related to the product or the service that you're working on. Uncovering more complexity can give you a lot more things to think about, but having a way of categorizing that and making meaning of it will give you a productive way forward. So I've used a few different frameworks in the past that help to uncover more of that complexity and open up the conversation about those challenges. This is one of them. I don't think you can see that very well, but this is the PESTLE framework. So it asks you to look at through the lenses of the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So by taking those different positions, you can really start to uncover a variety of different challenges. The other one is SWOT. I'm sure a lot of you know this one, but it asks you to analyze the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then finally, assumption mapping. This can be a really great way of categorizing the uncertainty in a project and making you look at how you prioritize them in terms of the impact versus risk. And once you do that, it helps give you a direction forward. So there might be all kinds of questions and things that you're not sure about, but by prioritizing them and categorizing in this way, it gives you a way forward. So now you've uncovered all of that complexity and really lent into it. The next step is to define what's meaningful, or have a North Star, if you will. And this is really about getting clear on what's important. In a project, that might mean uncovering, being clear on what the values, vision, and purpose is, so that when things do get a bit wobbly, you've got something to ground yourself in. It gives you a sense of how you make meaning of things as you go forward. If there's a lot of information and complexity at the beginning of a project, just working and collaborating with your team to unpick things and to get them to think about how each of these things relate to the objectives that you have will give you a sense of direction as a team. Truth number 3, doing something different can be scary. Break free of convention through creative collaboration. So whether it's wars in Gaza and Ukraine, the growth of AI, or volatility in markets and political spheres, all of this reminds us of our freedom. It reminds us that anything is possible. What's here today may be gone tomorrow. And that kind of existential fear that can create when you're faced with that means that it sometimes makes us nervous to kind of step forward into new opportunities. So, anyone remember this? This is Yahoo from the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, Yahoo was a main player in the digital space. They had opportunities to buy out Facebook and Google. They backed away from those opportunities in order to focus on the things that they knew best. So that was media. But, I mean, I didn't want to ask the question, but how many people use Yahoo now? And, you know, ultimately, they've kind of chosen this safe path rather than remaining competitive. So breaking free of convention doesn't mean you have to start from scratch every single time. You can still learn from the history and the context that you've come from while leaning into the freedom that you have during that UX process. So doing this is going to help us to identify the opportunities to take advantage of the momentum that we've already created, whilst also seeing areas where we can make drastically different decisions. I think that as UX strategists, we can leverage this innovation to face the uncertainty. So one way of avoiding recreating the past and looking at innovative new ways forward is to explore alternative futures. Scenario planning is one of the ways that we can help our clients and stakeholders to look at aspirational scenarios. So whether those are the risky ones or the safe ones, we can help them think about what would happen if we took this route or didn't take this route. What's the appetite for risk here and to do something really different? And WWF, World Wildlife Fund, is an organisation that's really effectively used this scenario planning in their Living Planets project. They created different scenarios that looked at factors that would affect biodiversity and conservation and used this to inform their approach to conservation efforts. Another way of supporting creative collaboration is through making time for inclusive design. So whether that is running co-creation sessions, accessibility testing, opening up to different perspectives, needs and requirements means that we are gathering different ways of viewing the world and different ideas for doing things differently going forward. And hopefully enables us to make braver choices. So when we think of creativity and innovation, we often think about being completely unrestrained, complete freedom. But in her book, The Ethics of Ambiguity, Simone de Beauvoir talked about how to be truly free, we need to will the freedom of others. What that really means is we can't just do anything that we want without considering the impact on other people. So from a UX perspective, that might mean that, you know, in some circumstances, we're looking to use behavioral economics and other things to influence our users down a certain path to try and reduce the risk that we have, you know, in those products and services, and to try and create as much certainty as we can of the end result. But from an ethical and existential perspective, it might be that we actually get a better result if we loosen that up and provide more freedom for people to make choices. So accessible design, I think, is a great one where we're enabling the freedom of those others to make choices and opening up our products and services to other audiences. But I think breaking free from convention might mean that we have to dare to design for freedom amidst that uncertainty. And as my wonderful colleague Emily Trotter, who's not here but also did a great talk, she looked at Victor Papanek's work and talked about how products built within constraints are the most beautiful and best performing because they must provide optimal performance under marginal conditions. And I think this really encapsulates this idea of, you know, within constraints, we're forced to be even more creative And I think this came up in the Condé Nast talk. It really rang a bell with me. So, number 4, where we are now is the result of our decisions. Take responsibility for the choices you make. So, as humans, we have this innate instinct to make meaning of the world, create stories. And existentialists believe that although lots of things are out of our control, the way that we respond to what's happening to us is where we can really take hold of that freedom and take responsibility for the choices. And each choice that we make shapes our reality. I think our clients and stakeholders depend on us to help them make meaning of the world. And so we have that responsibility as we help to shape the narrative around what's happening and the choices that we're making. But also, I think we need to remember not to jump too quickly to the solutions just because we're feeling that sense of fear about the uncertainty. So, in the context of all this limitless freedom and potential, making decisions can be really hard. And as we define recommendations and shape strategies, we're constantly making decisions about the way forward. And even though our users and our stakeholders might only see the end point of that, we're surrounded by this graveyard of other opportunities of things that could have been. And I think what we need to remember is not to get haunted by those what-ifs, because we're just making decisions with the information that we have in the moment. So, taking responsibility for our choices is a big thing. It's something really hard to do, and it can make us really back away from that responsibility. And I've really found this model, circles of control, helpful when I'm feeling that sense of, this is just happening to me, I've got no control here, to really focus in on what is it that I can have an impact on, where can I really influence things. And UX strategy is not a one-person job. It happens in collaboration amongst lots of different people. And I think if you're seeing people in your team who are backing out, opting out of making choices and taking responsibility for what's happening, sometimes having something like this and being able to have that conversation about, actually where can we have impact? What are the things that we can control in this situation can be really helpful. Next, put in place meaningful measures. So in this future with a product or service that has this kind of limitless potential, it might not be able to be defined using the same measures that you've used before. So I think this is a really great opportunity to redefine how you think of success. I think we can work with our teams to think about what are the right meaningful measures now for these new products and services. How can we have data that is meaningful to inform our future decisions? And as well as more typical metrics, in a previous role, I worked on a product where we tried to expand our sense of what metrics, how our measures of success might look like. So we had things like, have we improved people's sense of confidence? Are people better able to manage their work and life balance? Do they feel more supported by their employers? And this helped to put the focus on more meaningful measures of success, but it also led to us winning an industry award. Final point. The struggle will never end. Build negative capability. Don't worry, it does get more positive. I see these challenges coming up time and time again, not just for me, but for the people that I work with. And it is uncomfortable, but the good news is that that discomfort doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. I think that it is part of the norm, but that we can build the skills to deal with that. So if we can accept that this is complexity and uncertainty is part of our reality, we can learn to build that muscle to tolerate the difficulty. So this is a quote from one of my current favorite existential thinkers, Emmy van Deurzen. She says creative people are more able to accept uncertainty because they can be more playful, they can be more innovative in the face of these challenges. And she talks about how this is a practice to become a better human being. But I like to think that it's also a practice to become a better UX practitioner. I think we can imagine now that over time, as we roll our UX ball up that mountain every time, that process becomes easier, that our muscles become stronger. It becomes more of an elegant art, if you will. So here's a quick recap of my 5 existential truths. 1, to be a UXer is to exist in a state of tension and ambiguity, embrace ambiguity together. 2, facing up to hard truths is part of our job. Lean into authenticity to design meaningful, inclusive experiences. 3, doing something different can be scary. Break free of convention through creative collaboration. 4, where we are now is the result of our decisions. Take responsibility for the choices you make. And 5, the struggle will never end. Build negative capability. So, now back to Sisyphus. In his writing, Camus talked about how through embracing the freedom of choice, Sisyphus is able to break free of the torture by changing his attitude and his mindset. So he finds a sense of joy in the process and in the being. And I think that as we roll our own UX stone, we can also find that, and that we can start to own that experience. And if we take this on board, I think that we will become better UXers. We'll be more confident in holding that uncertainty. We will be more active in making meaning of it all. We will be more confident in working with our clients and stakeholders and normalizing this. And we'll also be more creative in how we approach it. I think also we'll have more robust UX strategies, more considered, more open to different possibilities, more creative, and more accountable. And finally, there's this great quote from The Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus. He says, "All great deeds and all great thoughts have a ridiculous beginning." So if you get that feeling of wanting to laugh and cry again in your project, just remember there are great things ahead. Thanks.